Hello, everybody. This is our last lecture, or last new lecture, I should say, in bioanthropology. This is kind of like accumulation of what we know about our human history. And so, kind of like the format I did with the previous sections, right? I kind of give you a base of what it is, and then now we're talking about stuff that they study. Okay, so let's get into it. What are some distinctive biological and non-biological characteristics of humans? Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the non-biological ones. The non-biological ones obviously is culture, right? Culture is like the biggest, most obvious thing that is different. Okay. Chapter objectives. Discuss how anthropology is integral to our understanding of biological and cultural evolution. Consider the evidence anthropology used to study hominid evolution. Fossils, stone tools, and other cultural remains are evidence or things that anthropologists use to study our you know our human our ancestors essentially. Um, yeah, we're going to explore the evolution of hominins, begin with our divergence from the shared ancestors with the chimpanzees, and continue the appearance of modern humans about 200,000 years ago. Uh, yeah. So basically, we're just going to learn about our ancestors and how we came to be. Uh, So before we get into that, let's talk about models of macroevolution. Macroevolution deals with geological time in both the extinction of old species and origin of new species. Okay, so this is macroevolution. Macro just means big, micro means small, right? Macro is talking about a lot of species, and micro is talking about one species. Felidae, I believe, is a class, and lion is a species. So we're talking about the evolution of Felidae, which is like, oh, all the nails get sharper, or all the paws get bigger, or whatever. That's Felidae. If we're talking about specifically about lions, we're talking about microevolution. Okay, so macroevolution is the evolution across many different species. Evidence for macroevolution processes include closely related fossils and creative anatomy of living organisms. The two major models of macroevolution are phyletic gradualism and punctual equilibria. So these two are the ones I want you to pay attention to. Models of macroevolution, phyletic gradualism. Phyletic gradualism was a dominant approach until about 30 years ago. Macroevolution represents a uniform process of microevolution over time. Speciation results from the slow, gradual transformation of a species over time, known as anagenesis. The fossil record shows no sharp breaks between old and new species. Okay, so this is pretty straightforward. This is a Charles Darwin kind of perspective on how evolution or macroevolution took place, right? And it's kind of like it's slow and steady, right? That's the way you should think about this. And because it's slow and steady, it should show no sharp breaks between different fossils over time. So basically, what it's saying is like, if species A turns into species B, it's going to happen slowly, right? Little things are going to change, little things are going to change, and eventually species B is the complete change, right? Slowly and surely. Okay, so the example we have here is some tigers have light stripes. They blend in with the grass. They have babies that succeed. Of those babies, they again mix the population, having darker and more defined stripes. They keep repeating the same process, and finally, all tigers have stripes. Slow and steady. Okay. Now, punctual equilibrium is the opposite of that. This is developed relatively recently by Golden Eldridge. I think they're still alive. Macroevolution is not a uniform process and differs from microevolution. Okay, so what this is saying is that this is very different. Okay, speciation, which is the new species, results from something called cladogenesis, the rapid development of a new species alongside the parent species. The fossil record can show sharp breaks between old and new species. Now, I'm going to show you a graph in the next slide that's going to help explain this. But some tigers had a mutation and they had stripes. They did so well that nearly none of them died, had babies. Now all tigers have stripes. The main point here is that it didn't take them like 10 generations for everyone to have stripes. It did it pretty quickly. Okay. So if you look at this graph, right, we start from species A. Okay. And as you can see with phyletic gradualism, it slowly turns into species B or species C slowly, very slowly. Okay, see how it's gradual? However, with it over here, it's like all normal, then all of a sudden it splits up. Okay, that is the difference, right? Is that this one happens slowly and this one happens abruptly. That means that if species A on the punctual equilibrium side, it's the same, it's the same, it's the same, then boom, all of a sudden it's big changes. Okay. Now, and like, do you need to know this super well? No, but you need to know it for the purposes of this class. So, and I'll explain that toward the end. All right, so who were the first hominins? The first hominins appeared in the late Miocene or early Pliocene. Hominins are bipedal hominoids or apes that walk on two legs. Most early hominins are placed in the genus Australopithecus. Some hominins eventually developed changes in their dentition, expanded brains, and reliance on tools and language. Example, culture. So this is actually very similar to the overall primate evolution, but this is more specific to hominins, right? Changes in the teeth, bigger brains, and reliance on culture. Now, this is very important. What are the advantages of bipedalism? All hominins, living or extinct, are linked by habitual bipedalism. What does that mean? That just means that humans walk on two legs, right? Habitually, though, meaning that they do it like naturally, right? So, like, can a monkey walk on two legs? Yes, but does it do it habitually? No. Can a dog walk on two legs? Yes. Can I do it habitually? No, right? The first hominins were likely omnivorous, meaning that they eat both vegetables and meat. Bipedalism allowed hominins to expand their range to increase their food options beyond the shrinking forest, see predators in the open country, carry infants, food, and tools in their hands, and finally reduce the exposure of the skin to the sun. So these are pretty straightforward. If you imagine the forest are shrinking for whatever reason, you need to go outside the forest to look for food. And if you are bipedal, you can go further out, right? If you are standing upright, you can see predators easily because you're standing up tall. When you leave the forest, if you're on two legs, you can carry things with your hands instead of using them to walk. And finally, when you're standing upright, the sun to skin exposure is much less. Like, yeah. We'll go back to this in a little bit. So, how do we know that humans are how do we know that things that we find, like animals that we find, are habitually bipedal? The anatomical evidence for bipedalism is the position of the foramen magnum. Don't worry, we're gonna have a picture. The position of the foramen magnum, a basin-shaped pelvis, femurs angled inward, and finally, when the big toe is in line with other toes. Other evidence of bipedalism is literally footprints that dated back to 3.6 million years ago. Okay, but let's talk about those four top ones first. The position of the foramen magnum, right? So the foramen magnum is basically the thing that goes in, like it's like your spine basically that goes into your head. If you're standing upright, the spine goes to the bottom of your skull, and if you're standing on all fours, it goes to the back of your skull, right? Basin-shaped pelvis. If you look at the human on the right, the pelvis is round. If you look at the pelvis on the left, the pelvis is straight, right? The basin is shaped that way so that we have more mobility and range of motion for our walking. Femurs angled inward and big toe in line with other toes. As you can see on the chimpanzee, you can tell like the toe. Um, sorry. Uh, um, if you look at the toe and the femurs, right? So the femurs, I believe, help take the pressure off of the bones when you're walking, and the toe helps keep your body in line, right? Obviously, on the chimpanzee side, the toes, as you can tell, are spread out. And it's probably meant for tree climbing. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this pretty straightforward. Okay. Now, so the other thing that we have here, trail of fossilized footprints in Lake Tanzania dating about 3.6 million years ago. That's this hardworking man right here, this archaeologist. Uh, sorry. As you can tell with this, there were footprints there, and luckily there was a volcanic eruption, and then it laid into the footprints kind of like a mold. And luckily, and then now we have evidence that they exist, that they were bipedal hominins 3.6 million years ago. Okay. Now, as you can tell, just a quick note, we went over this in archaeology. He's cutting up this space very well, like and very organized, so they know that he can do. So he knows that he can do this. So people know where he's dug and how deep he dug and everything, just to be very exact. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult. So, how do early hominids fit in human evolution? Are much debated. You don't really need to know this super deep, but I do want to just talk about it just so you have a general understanding of it. Sahelanthropus agenesis from Chad and Central Africa, Orantugenesis from Kenya and Eastern Africa, and Ardipithecus cadaba and Ardipithecus ramidus from Ethiopia and Eastern Africa. Ardipithecus ramidus shows that some early hominins lived in wooded environments rather than open savanna. Yeah. All right, and Australopithecines. Australopithecines include A. anamensis, A. ampharensis, A. balogazali, A. africanus, A. Aethiopithecus, A. garhi, A. robustus, A. boise. Those fossils are found in eastern and southern Africa, but A. balogazali was covered in Chad, Central Africa. And go back to the map. So you can see, like, most of the stuff is found in the east and then the south, but balogazali was found in the north. So, just goes to show, just because there's stuff in one place and you can't find something doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means that it's in a different. It might be somewhere where you can't or isn't normal. Now, the most famous fossil is that of Lucy. This is named for the beetle song "Lucy in the Sky." Remember how we talked about in archaeology how it's really difficult to find, like a lot of stuff in the ground. Well, this is a great example of the opposite of that, right? Lucy was a 40% complete skeleton. I believe it's from a tar pit. That's why we were able to find so much of it. Lucy was fully bipedal. However, she still had tree climbing adaptations in the long arms and curved fingers and toes. And don't worry, there's a picture. Small brain, otherwise similar to chimpanzee. So on the right, we have a human. All the way to the left, we have a chimpanzee. In the middle, we have Lucy. As you can tell with Lucy, right, her hips, she's bipedal, right? The foramen magnum, the hips, the femurs, and the toes are all representative of a hominin that's on two legs. That being said, though, if you look at her arms, she is still very much adapted to living to at least swinging on trees. And if you look at her skull, her brain is still chimpanzee size. So this was very telling and very, very important for us to know how some of our ancestors used to look like and used to live. And if with this specific image, it's a very clear indicator that we are somehow related to chimpanzees. Okay. Great. So this is, again, not super important, but whatever. Lucy was important. This other stuff, kind of important. This is kind of important, not really. So Australopithecine shows changes in hominin dentition. Teeth show an evolutionary trend towards smaller front teeth and very large back teeth. Dental arch becomes parabolic, unlike apes with a U-shaped arch, viewed as an adaptation to eating coarse vegetation. Australopithecines dating from 3 to 2 million years ago with this dental pattern are divided into two groups: gracile Australopithecines and robust Australopithecines. Okay. The significant thing that you need to pay attention to here is the U-shaped arch in their dental whatever, because it just means that they were eating coarse vegetation. Yep. Okay, great. Gracile Australopithecines consist of A. africanus and A. garhi remains, lived in eastern and southern Africa from 32 million years ago, had small and lightly built faces. Molars, however, were enlarged. Brains were chimpanzee size. Evidence for stone tool use by A. garhi. Postcranial skeletons similar to those robust. Okay, so for his one, molars were enlarged, again, coarse vegetation, and brains are chimpanzee size, right? They still had small brains, but they were using stone tools. Robust Australopithecines lived in eastern and southern Africa from 2.5 to 0.7 million years ago. Include several species such as Paranthropus robustus and P. boise. Had rugged jaws and flat faces. Molars were enormous, again, coarse vegetation. Brain chimpanzee size. Evidence for bone tool use for digging. Post-cranial skeletons similar to this. Okay, so significant things here: coarse vegetation, small brains, and they use bone tools, right? The other one used stone tools and used bone tools. Still very interesting. All right, moving on. Okay, what do we know about early Homo? First members appeared during a pronounced drying trend of 2.5 to 2 million years ago, lived from 2.4 to 1.5 million years ago, evolved apparently from gracile Australopithecine ancestors. Early Homo species lived alongside robust Australopithecines in Earth's eastern Africa, recognized for having larger brains than Australopithecines, 400 to 550 cm cubed. So at this point, they have bigger brains, but not massive brains. And that's basically the main importance of this slide. The recognized species in the Homo genus include H. habilis, H. naledi, H. georgicus, H. erectus, which is important, H. ergaster, H. antecessor, H. heidelbergensis, H. neanderthalensis, the Denisovans, and finally us, the Homo sapiens. Okay. Now, what do we know about early Homo? They first recognized at Olduvai Gorge in 1963 by Louis Leakey. The skull from Olduvai Gorge had a brain size of 680, which is, again, much bigger. This is the first one, 2.4, 1.5 million years ago. Leakey named the species Homo habilis, or handyman, because they use tools. And some see many early Homo species here. Early Homo exhibit the earliest defined stone tool making style called Old Dewan tradition. So they were making their own tools. Now, when people say they're making their own tools, people are thinking of like some King Arthur stuff. No, this is very basic. Remember, we are barely Homo sapiens at this point. This is a tool that they're working with, right? And so I want to put this picture here to give you some context. It is very difficult for archaeologists to tell whether this is a tool or whether this is a rock. Because if I was looking at this, I would just be like, yo, this is just a regular rock. But this is actually a tool created by them. How do we know that it's a tool? Well, it's by the patterns of the markings on the actual rock, right? So, for example, if you are grabbing a rock and rubbing it against another rock to make it sharp, it will show that in the microscopic lines on the thing, right? That is different from it decaying or getting chopped off by another rock, or by falling into the water and then getting shaven off. Even though it looks the same, by using a microscope, you can tell how it was by the grooves on the rock, you can tell whether it was man-made or just or natural. Okay. The scanning electron microscope allows taphonomists to distinguish between different kinds of marks on bones, high-end tooth marks on modern bones, or V-shaped stone tool cut marks on modern bones. So how do we know, for example, how do we know, for example, that these bones were not just that they were eaten by humans, right? And so one of the indicators is that there is a V-shaped or a consistent shaped tool being used on the bone, while the other one just demonstrates an animal biting it. Okay. All right. So who was Homo erectus? Early Homo disappeared around 1.8 million years ago. Either early Homo evolved into or was replaced by Homo erectus. This is very important. See this little line right here? That is the whole, or part of the reason why this is why it's so important to know or to think about phyletic gradualism versus punctuate equilibria. Did they turn into Homo erectus, or did they live alongside Homo erectus? That is a very important question. We don't know. Okay. Homo erectus had substantially larger brains than earlier hominins, was the first hominin to spread out of Africa into Europe and Asia, had less sexual dimorphism than early Homo, and lived from 1.8 to 0.4 million years ago. So very big brains, okay? Less sexual dimorphism, that's not very important. It just means the size between the female and the male wasn't as significant. Again, not super important. What did Homo erectus look like? Homo erectus brains average about 1,000 cm cubed within the range of modern humans. This is a massive brain, right? Skulls exhibited heavy brow ridges. Molars were smaller and jawbones less robust than early Homo. Postcranial skeleton was similar to modern humans, other than being more robust. Okay, so again, big point here is that it is 1,000 cm cubed, which means that they got big brains. Okay. This is what we think they look like. Not super accurate, but if you were to bring a Homo erectus baby into modern society, they arguably should be able to survive here pretty well. They are intelligent enough, essentially. All right, now, so what was the culture of Homo erectus? Homo erectus is linked to an Acheulean tradition of stone tool making. Acheulean tools, including hand axes, are found in Africa and Europe. Homo erectus in Eastern Asia used flakes and bamboo instead of hand axes. Homo erectus controlled use of fire has been found on some Homo erectus sites. Anthropologists debate whether Homo erectus was a big game hunter. Now, this is the part, if you're not listening to this part, you're going to be screwed on the test. Homo erectus, it was a big game hunter. Why is that important for anthropologists to know? The reason why that's important is because if Homo erectus was a big game hunter, it has a lot of different implications for their culture. For example, did they have a leader? Did they have a language? Did they have a hierarchy? Who knows? Because if they had to hunt a big game, if they had to hunt a big animal, it means they had to work together, and that would mean completely different things for what they were doing at that time. All right, so what happened to Homo erectus? Phyletic gradualists argue that Homo erectus eventually turned into Homo sapiens, and others, the punctuate equilibrium people believe that, and other people believe that punctuate equilibria was what happened, right? So basically, the argument behind that is Homo erectus. Remember that little graph we saw? Was very little change happened between for a while, and then all of a sudden they changed into Homo sapiens. That's why they think it's punctuate equilibria. Okay, and it also means that we possibly lived among Homo erectus for a little while before they went extinct. Okay. So full circle. What are some distinctive biological, non-biological characters of humans? We already went over the non-biological. The biggest thing is culture, right? Biological, though, our vision is not bad, but more importantly, our bipedalism is very special, right? It gave us those four things: the reduced exposure to sun, ability to go outside the shrinking forest for food, the ability to carry stuff, and finally, what was the last one? Oh, and see predators in open country. Okay, so that's pretty much the last thing. I hope you guys enjoyed this class. I'm sorry this last section wasn't so exciting. It's not my favorite, section. But if you have any questions, please shoot me an email at raymond.fong@kvcc.cu.edu. It was a pleasure having you all in my class, and just pay attention to your grades so that if there's any issues, you can talk to me about it immediately.